In the thick of World War II, 3 fighter pilots took off over the Atlantic skies and were never seen again. Families grieved, officials searched, but the men were lost to history. 75 years later, deep in a forest no one thought to check, hikers stumbled upon something chilling. 3 warplanes sitting almost untouched, cockpits open, controls still intact, even a dog tag left behind, but not a single trace of the pilots who flew them. How could planes survive time itself, yet leave no sign of the men inside? Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support means the world and helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Stick with us until the end, and if this mystery moves you, share your thoughts in the comments and pass it along to a friend. 1944. The world was still locked in a war that seemed to stretch endlessly, swallowing up young men and spitting out silence. 3 pilots, young, sharp, and handpicked for their skill, were assigned what should have been a routine mission. A simple flight over a stretch of coastline they knew like the back of their hands. Nothing heroic, nothing dangerous. At least, that's what they thought. They joked on the tarmac while the mechanics checked the engines. One of them lit a cigarette, puffing out smoke as if to ease the nerves he didn't want anyone to see. Another adjusted his gloves over and over, a tiny habit the others teased him about. The youngest smiled too wide, trying to cover that anxious beat in his chest. They looked like any group of soldiers, just boys with wings sewn to their jackets. When the signal came, their engines roared alive, breaking the stillness of dawn. The ground crew covered their ears, watching the 3 planes roll forward one by one. A few bystanders muttered behind their backs, "Those kids flying out again, acting like the war's just another day job." Another voice cut in, softer. "I hope they make it back. This war doesn't care who's good or careful." The words hung there, unnoticed by the pilots climbing into the sky. The first minutes of the flight were smooth. The hum of the engines, the cool rush of air through the cockpit, the comfort of routine. The kind of mission where you expect boredom, not danger. But then, the radio chatter thinned. Static hissed between their words. Clouds rolled in, slow and heavy, pressing like a lid over the horizon. At first, they thought nothing of it. Just weather. Just a little turbulence. But the clouds thickened, swallowing the sun until the world turned dim. The lead pilot's voice crackled over the radio, calm but clipped. "Stay close. Keep formation." A pause. Then more static. The second plane answered, a faint reply, then silence. On the ground, controllers strained their ears at the radios. They called for updates, checked their instruments again and again. Nothing. 3 blips on the radar, then 2, then 1, and then nothing at all. Hours passed. Search teams were scrambled, eyes scanning the water and the forests below. No wreckage, no smoke, no bodies. Just empty skies. Families waited for telegrams that never gave answers, only condolences. And in the barracks, whispers spread. "They must have gone down in the ocean," one man muttered. Another shook his head. "Then where's the oil slick? Where's the debris?" What was supposed to be a simple flight became an unsolved riddle. 3 men had left the runway that morning, but not a single one returned. And so began a mystery that would haunt the next 75 years. Hours turned into days, and the absence of the 3 fighter pilots gnawed at the squadron like a festering wound. Their bunks remained neatly tucked, flight jackets hung in silence, and the smell of engine oil still lingered in the hangar. Yet the men who gave life to those machines were nowhere. Command tried to keep things steady, dispatching search planes, combing over maps, and issuing clipped orders that sounded confident on paper but cracked at the edges in reality. Crews in the mess hall muttered under their breath, forks scraping against tin plates. Some swore the men had gone down over the channel. Others whispered darker things, as if the forest of northern France had swallowed them whole. One young mechanic, barely old enough to shave, kept polishing the same wrench, again and again, his lips moving in a low voice. Planes don't just vanish. Metal leaves wreckage, smoke something. But nothing had been found. No parachutes. No signals, no burning trail in the night sky. Just silence, and that silence spread, infecting even the boldest pilots. Men who once laughed loud now kept to themselves, fiddling with their gloves, rolling cigarettes they never smoked. In the barracks you could hear every cough, every restless toss in the night. The air was too heavy for jokes. Some ground crew began to turn bitter. 2 of them, standing behind a fuel truck, sneered at the missing men. "Maybe they just ran," one said, spitting into the dirt. "Cowards? Nah," the other replied, lowering his voice. "Something else happened." And command ain't telling us. Their words carried, sharp enough for nearby ears, adding thorns to the wound. Letters were sent to families, but even those were vague. Missing in action, stamped across the page. Wives and parents clung to hope, while fellow pilots clenched their teeth. Hope was thin out here. The strangest thing wasn't the loss itself, but the way the story sat. It didn't feel finished. It lingered like smoke in a room with no fire, a weight pressing down on everyone. And somewhere, in the silence of the countryside, 3 planes sat waiting. Not wrecked, not rusted, waiting. Weeks stretched into months, and the war raged on without pause. New missions replaced the old, new pilots filled the bunks, and yet the names of the 3 missing men never left the bulletin board. Their photographs faded under the sunlight that cut through the barracks windows, edges curling, eyes staring back with a silence that unsettled even the bravest. The military wrapped the disappearance in a neat phrase, missing in action, a phrase that sounded official enough for reports, but hollow to anyone who actually knew them. Families received letters with stiff condolences, the kind that seemed written by a typewriter rather than a human hand. Mothers lit candles, wives pressed uniforms against their chests, children grew up asking questions that had no answer. Time, they said, heals, but time only sharpened the strangeness. No wreckage. No signal, not even a fragment of twisted metal. Pilots crash, engines fail, but something always remains. Yet here, nothing. In the nearby villages, old farmers sitting outside taverns whispered their own theories. Some said the men had defected, flying off to start new lives in secret. Others swore the skies over France were cursed, that certain valleys held fog so thick it swallowed men whole. A barkeep polishing a glass leaned over to a patron once and muttered, "Mark my words, those boys ain't dead. They're out there, somewhere." Back at base, the story hardened into a taboo. New recruits were warned not to ask about the 3 missing pilots. Veterans deflected with shrugs, though their eyes betrayed unease. A mechanic once caught himself staring at 3 empty hangar slots, muttering, "Still waiting for you," before shaking his head and walking away. Years passed. The war ended. Soldiers went home. Medals were buried in drawers. Scars were hidden beneath shirts. But the mystery remained, and when decades slipped by, the story began to change shape. It wasn't just a military incident anymore. It became folklore. Young pilots whispered it in training halls. Historians scribbled it in margins. Families never stopped wondering. 75 years later, the forest finally gave its answer. It was the summer of 2019 when the silence finally cracked. A group of hikers, ordinary men and women out for a weekend trek through the thick woods of eastern France, veered off their marked trail. The forest was dense here, the kind that swallows light, with moss hanging off branches like wet cloth, and the air so still it carried a strange weight. They moved single file, boots pressing into damp earth, when one of them stopped short. Something unnatural caught the corner of his eye. A glint. Not sunlight through leaves, but sharper, colder. He pushed back the brush, heart thumping, and froze. There it was, a wing, tilted, rusted, but unmistakably human-made. Paint chipped away by rain and time, yet fragments of faded markings still clung to the surface. He called for the others, voice unsteady, and together they peeled back decades of vines and undergrowth. The shape emerged, like the forest itself exhaled a secret it had guarded too long. The first plane, not wreckage scattered by violence, no twisted skeleton of metal. Instead, the fuselage rested almost whole, nose buried in the soil, canopy shattered but frame eerily intact, like it had simply stopped. Further in, the second plane revealed itself. The moss had crept across its wings like a blanket, trees sprouting through what once cut the sky. Its cockpit was open, seat empty, but the instruments inside still bore faint lettering. And then, deeper still, the third. Its propeller bent, its engine silent, but the body almost untouched. No fire damage, no violent tear, just 3 machines asleep in the earth, as though placed there by unseen hands. The hikers whispered in awe, voices cracking under disbelief. One man swore he heard a metallic echo when the wind rushed through the hollow cabin, like the planes were sighing after decades in silence. Another shook his head, muttering, "How the hell is this possible?" Word spread fast. Officials arrived. Tape was strung around the perimeter. Archaeologists crouched over dials and switches, as if touching them might wake the ghosts still tethered to those cockpits. For 75 years, people had asked the same question. Where did they go? Now they had an answer, but not a solution. Because the planes told only half the story. The bigger mystery was yet to come. The excavation began slowly, almost reverently. Teams moved through the site with brushes and gloves, not drills. Every scrape of moss revealed something more. The dials still intact, the faded numbers etched into glass, even fragments of personal belongings. A torn leather glove in one cockpit, a rusted dog tag half buried in another. These weren't just machines anymore, they were tombs. Inside the first plane, investigators found the pilot's seat empty, canopy shattered, but no sign of a body. The seatbelt was unclasped, as if someone had stepped out long ago. In the second, more chilling, a flight manual, waterlogged but legible, resting on the dashboard, pages stuck together like they'd been frozen in that moment forever. The third revealed the strangest detail. The ignition was still switched to on, though the engine hadn't roared in decades. How had these planes landed without tearing themselves apart? No scorched earth, no splintered crash trail. They seemed to have been set down gently, swallowed by the forest, preserved by time. And yet, no records ever suggested survivors, no reports of men walking out of those woods. Families of the pilots, many long gone, had their descendants arrive to stand among the trees. They touched the metal, whispered names they had only ever heard in stories. Some cried quietly, others just stared, shaking their heads, lost between relief and renewed grief. Meanwhile, whispers spread through the village taverns nearby. Old men leaned over their drinks muttering, "Planes don't just land themselves." Others shrugged, saying war had left behind stranger ghosts. But when the hikers who first stumbled on the site passed through town, they caught fragments of gossip behind their backs, speculation about curses, secrets, even cover-ups. Yet in truth, nothing explained it. 3 young men vanished in 1944, swallowed in the chaos of war. 75 years later, their planes reappeared, almost untouched, like relics caught between two worlds. But the one answer everyone wanted, what happened to the pilots themselves, was the one thing the forest refused to give. And so the planes remain, silent guardians of a mystery never solved. Each one a monument not just to war, but to the strange way history sometimes refuses to close its wounds. Because some stories aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be remembered. If stories like this give you chills and leave you questioning what's truly out there, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss the next mystery. And let me know in the comments, what do you think really happened to those 3 pilots?